Hey everyone, welcome to the February 17th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona, joined by my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to this Saturday at Fairgrounds, where they're running a 13-race card featuring plenty of stakes action. We're going to talk about many of those stakes races as we tackle the all-stakes late pick 5 sequence comprising races 9 through 13. The races in that sequence are the Alstall Memorial, the Grade 3 Mineshaft for the older horses on the dirt, Grade 3 Fairgrounds, same conditions but on the turf, and then the 3-year-olds at the end of the sequence, both the Oaks fillies heading towards that race, the Grade 2 Rachel Alexandra, a prep for that race, and the Derby horses in the Grade 2 Risen Star. We'll see if that prep produces any starters towards the Kentucky Derby, because it feels like one of the strongest fields we've seen yet on the Kentucky Derby trail, Craig, as this is one of those preps that I'm really looking forward to see how some of these horses that showed promise last year are going to stack up against each other in their 3-year-old debuts.
Yeah, by the time this race rolls around, it'll be about a week. I've been looking forward to it because they draw so early at the fairgrounds. And to be honest, we don't often get to see this kind of diversity this early on with horses shipping in from all over and some pretty top horses in here as well. So, I mean, the whole card is great, especially this late pick 5. And I think the Risen Star is the best race of them all. So really looking forward to it, as I say, and I have been ever since the PPs were drawn.
Yeah, a lot of people do consider the morning line favorite for that race, Smile Happy, as the leading Kentucky Derby candidate that's accrued points right now, and we'll see how he does in his 3-year-old debut and whether or not Craig or I are going to be on his bandwagon heading into this race. But we'll get to that at the end of the podcast. Craig, let's start things off with one of the turf races in this sequence, race 9. It is the Albert M. Stahl Memorial, going a mile and the 16th on the grass course for the fillies and mares. And I found this to be a pretty difficult race to handicap because from a class standpoint, I guess you kind of want to start the conversation with Abscond, who was the beaten favorite in the Marie Krantz Memorial, which we did talk about with Marcus Hirsch when he was on the podcast doing Fairgrounds with us a few weeks ago. She was pretty disappointing in that race, though. I know we all kind of respected her that day, but she really did not show up, and she strung together quite a list of defeats at this point, some at short prices, some not, but if she brings her A game, she's certainly going to be tough in this race. I think you just have to have a lot of questions after that last race.
Yeah, I went back and watched the replay a couple times, just trying to find anything, an excuse. Maybe the rail wasn't good, but I couldn't come up with anything. I just don't think she ran. So for me, she's going to be tough to take at a short price, and I don't think I'm going to use her. And that's it. I just didn't care much for that Marie Krantz Memorial at all. Even the winner past the plate, I mean, she was fine. I imagine I would use her. She always seems to run a decent race, and I would have her more as a B or C type horse. But I really wanted to get away from that race and look in a different direction. There wasn't a whole lot of options. Some of the horses that are coming in from different races just appear way over their heads. And the horse I wound up landing on was the 8-horse Amiche. I have watched her last races when she was still a 3-year-old, the Pago Hop. Ran very late last year, and I liked what I saw there. She had won wire to wire the time before with a 113 speed figure, which is even better than past the plate ran winning last time out. And last time out, she regressed to a 107. But when you watch the trip, I think she showed some heart and some talent. She was wide. I don't know if she was as wide as the comments say she was, but she definitely lost some ground on both turns. And what I did like is she was kind of getting herded through the stretch. There's really no comment made of it, just kind of says she was out-kicked. But the horse that was hurting her, she eventually was able to fight by. And I just really like the way she finished off the race. And looking for a new face in here, Cherie DeVoe trained. She's been red hot at the fairgrounds. So that's the one I'm going to land on as my top pick.
Yeah, I definitely have no problem with Amiche. I think that she makes a lot of sense in this race for all the reasons that you mentioned. And the one thing that I'll add is that the horse that did defeat her last time, Lovely Ride, came back and ran really well, arguably ran the best race of all in the Marie Krantz. She's not back in this race, but Lovely Ride just lost the Krantz by a head after chasing the pace the entire way. That was a race that did kind of fall apart as Past the Plate was able to make that big launch from last place and get up to win right on the wire. So we'll see how the horses do from that local prep. Of the horses coming out of that race, I suppose Past the Plate is the strongest contender. It seemed like she did take a step forward first time off the layoff last time, and I mean, she's run well at the Fairgrounds in the past, so I think that she does make quite a bit of sense, but how short a price do you really want to take on a horse that comes from so far back like she does? She was 8-1 last time. You're going to get a fraction of that price this time, and there is a little bit more speed in this race. We'll see how fast they go on the front end, but I don't think there's that much more speed, and Adelaide Miss is likely to get to the lead once again. Amiche could be stalking her. We'll see how much pressure some of the others apply, but I didn't want to take either Past the Plate or Abscond as the likely favorites here. Craig, you made a good case for Amiche. She's definitely one that I want to use. If there was another horse that I would kind of just give a brief shout to out of the Krantz Memorial, it would be Out of Sorts, one of the two Brittany Russell trainees in here. She was never really in the mix that day, but like you said, I know Marcus was tweeting during the day on the Lecomte card that maybe the rail was not the place to be on the turf course. I went back and watched some of the races. I don't know how much I necessarily agree or disagree with that, but it did seem to play out that way in at least this race, and Out of Sorts just never really making up any ground down towards the inside. So she's getting a rider switch to Louis Saez, which never hurts, getting blinkers on for the first time, and she's not a horse that's untalented. She's run some decent speed figures in the past, so once again, kind of like with Past the Plate, we'll see how much pace she gets to close into. But I mean, if I was going to look outside of the horses out of the Krantz, Craig, I mean, Amiche we've established is a contender, but there are two other fuzzy horses that I do want to get your take on that I was trying to really make a strong case for, and I feel like with both of them, I only got halfway there. I can't really give a ringing endorsement of either one, but I do think that that they both are worth mentioning, and one of those is the number 5, She Can't Sing, who I realize has not had much success on the turf. She's 0 for 8 on that surface. She's picked up some pieces in a few races, but she's run some big speed figures in the past on the dirt, and throughout her career, she's kind of run comparable figs on the dirt and the turf, despite having done most of her winning on the dirt, and they've kind of just pigeonholed her whenever she tries the turf as a 5-furlong turf sprinter, and I don't really know why. I mean, there's nothing in her PPs that says that she's supposed to love going that short. She was successful going longer distances very early in her career, so I just feel like this is an interesting new experiment with She Can't Sing, a horse that does have some raw talent. I just think they're trying to figure out exactly what she wants to do. And the other horse that I want to mention is the number 10, Drapes, kind of a similar kind of thing where she's stretching out in distance, but I think that both of these horses are coming out of a strong race that stakes race that took place towards the end of January that was won by LZ with Change of Control. Got a fast speed figure that day, that race did, and both these horses finished towards the back of the pack, or I should say mid-pack in the case of Drapes, but they've run some nice speed figures in the past, and I don't think they're totally out of this, and it's not like the standard set by horses like Amiche and Past the Plate is so high that runners like this can't potentially clear it at better prices.
Yeah, if you had asked me to guess the two horses you were going to mention, I actually would have passed. I would have had both of them. Because I'm with you. I don't think either one of them are really turf sprinters. When you look back further in their PPs, they both run pretty well at routes. Drapes, actually, the last time that she routed outside that Colonial race, back at Gulfstream, she won with a 114 speed figure, which is better than Past the Plate ran. So in a race, I want to cast a pretty wide net and not really use much of the top two. I've got no problems with that. The only other horse I really tried to consider was Dawn's Dancer, the 7, who is a newly turned 5-year-old, had run some okay figures and seems to be improving, but I just couldn't quite get there. I mean, maybe if my ticket came up a lot less than expected, I would try to get her in as a C, but I actually prefer all the other horses you mentioned, out of Sorts, Drapes, and She Can't Sing. So my top pick would still be Amiche, but I would be going deep after her.
Yeah, I guess I did the same thing as you. I just went through every horse in this race and see what kind of case I could build for them, and I even did take a look at that number 7, Dawn's Dancer, but I ultimately went off her because watching her turf races, she just looks a little bit one-pace to me, and I feel like she could just take some token Jose Ortiz money when others might get a little bit dismissed for because they don't have top connections in their corner. So we'll see how the board shakes out in this one. You'll get to see how the win odds are playing out before you can craft your pick 5 ticket for this race, but it does feel like one where, as Craig said, you might want to cast a wide net. Let's move on to race 10, the second leg of this pick 5 sequence. It is the grade 3 mine shaft, going a mile and a 16th for the older horses on the dirt. And Craig, while we don't have any winners of necessarily big races in here, I do feel like there's a lot of promise in this field. Plenty of 4-year-olds that are stepping up in class against graded stakes companies. Some of them have tried it before without much success, but a few are coming in off impressive allowance victories. And I do feel like there's a lot of talent concentrated right towards the middle of the field, or I should say the middle of the starting gate, with the number 4 Olympiad and the number 5 Miles D. And I'm not going to be surprised when either one of these horses pans out to be among the better horses in this division by the end of the year, but they've got to take that step in this race.
Yeah, they certainly have the speed figures to win a race like that, and I think you've probably pointed out the 2 horses to beat. Of those, I do actually much prefer Olympiad. I just really like the way he's been running. I liked his race in the Met Mile or the Cigar Mile quite a bit, even though he was 4th. I thought that was a really strong field. He came back to show it was no fluke in that allowance win at Gulfstream, and he's just a horse who's shown a lot of talent ever since he was at when he made his return from the layoff at Saratoga. He'd even broke his maiden the previous year and then went away for a long time. But whatever was wrong with him that necessitated that layoff, Bill Mott's figured it out because he's done nothing but run good races and run fast. So he's a horse I really like in here. I've got no real knocks on Mile D other than that this is at the mile and a 16th distance. I'm really not sure that this is what he wants. I think it might be just a little bit short for him, and it would give an edge to Olympiad over him. So of the 2 main contenders, I would prefer Olympiad, maybe making him an A and Miles D a B type. Of the others in here, the one horse I definitely would have to use, and anybody that listened to the show last week would know I like this horse, but he scratched at Oaklawn Park in the Racerback, and that was Silver Prospector. He's the 2. So I won't bore everybody with it, but other than to say he's a horse who's shown capable of running nice speed figures in the past. I thought his last trip was just a total line through where he was really wide around both turns. Basically had no chance at all. So I'm going to give him another shot in here as well and use him as a co-A type. There's a couple others I want to talk about, but I'll throw it back to you and we'll get back to them.
Yeah, we have pretty similar thoughts about the 2 favorites in here. I actually before we started recording this, I just finished taping a video on this race that you could find on the DRF's YouTube channel, kind of an in-depth look at more of the contenders. But I was basically saying the exact same thing that Craig did about Miles D. I feel like more distance is what this horse wants, and he's just kind of a grinder. He lacks that turn of foot that I think you're going to need in a race like this. I mean, he's only run 6 times in his career. He could have further improvement, and he might prove both of us wrong in that respect. But I do think that he's the kind of horse that really relished the demanding mile and an 1/8 last time out in the Discovery, and he beat Speaker's Corner. And I think this might be a slightly different race from a pace standpoint and trip standpoint, with 11 horses signed on, and him on the pace projector shown more towards the back of the pack. And I'm a big fan of Olympiad, Craig. I think that I've made that clear. We've talked about him recently on the Pace Cast. I thought he put in a sneaky good effort in that Cigar Mile. I felt like Irad Ortiz kind of gave up prematurely that day, let him drop out of the race without asking him on the turn, and he kind of realized he still had plenty of horse underneath him at the top of the stretch and got to riding again, and he came on for 4th at the end of that race. But as you said, no disgrace losing to some very good horses in that spot. And I loved his allowance win at Gulfstream last time. I know that he got a moderate pace to stalk, and he just basically had to sprint home from there, but I mean, he did it the right way. I love the way this horse moves. A mile and a 16th feels like it's the perfect distance for him. And Craig, I don't know about you, but when I look at this pace projector, I know that there's no blue flag indicating favors on or near the lead, but for all functional purposes, I'm kind of coming at it from that direction because there's no confirmed frontrunner in this field. I mean, it shows Olympiad on the lead. He's not a need the lead type, and the same thing goes for Sprawl. They're the only 2 horses in this race that have shown any initiative to be close to the pace, and there are just a lot of deep closers in this race that I think could be somewhat compromised by the way this plays out, and it just feels like of all the major contenders, Olympiad is going to be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I'm going to have to check with our main tech guy, Dan, and find out why there is no blue flag, because honestly, it looks pretty close to one to me, unless I'm missing something, which is often possible. The computer and the algorithm usually isn't going to make mistakes, but I'll double check with them because, as you said, we only have a couple horses listed as even trackers in here, and that's Sprawl, who I don't really think he's a serious contender. I mean, I think he's probably a decent horse. He always runs figures in the 1 teens, but I don't really think he's a contender, and I think Olympiad can just sit off of him, and then it's a pretty big gap back to everybody else. So I agree. It's part of why I like the Olympiad over Miles D. I just think he has a big tactical advantage in here. A couple other horses I wanted to mention were Obesos. I'm wondering how much money he's going to take because he is he is the local horse. I mean, he spent most of his career running at the fairgrounds. He did have a nice comeback allowance win back in early January, right after the first of the year, but I didn't really like the speed figure much. I didn't like what I saw. Granted, it was a big gap back to third as he nosed out Intrepid Heart, but I just think this is a really big step up in class and suspect he's going to be overbet. The other horse that interests me a little bit is Untreated, coming in for Todd Pletcher. He is drawn outside, which is kind of a negative, but he was a horse who was on the Derby trail somewhat. I mean, he was 7-1 in the Bluegrass. Didn't run very well at all, but has come back to run 2 nice races. Had a nice 1:15 the first race back. Only a 1:10 TimeformUS, but that was in a race with just a dawdling pace, and he was the only horse making up ground. So if some pace develops, he is one I might give a look to and use underneath in these in verticals and in the pick 5 ticket.
Yeah, among the short prices, I would say that I'm somewhat against Untreated. I just feel like he's beaten weaker fields in his last couple of races. That allowance race that he won last time out on December 31st at Aqueduct, he did have some trouble at the start, so he was much the best that day despite winning by only 3/4 of a length, but that's just come back as a very weak race. We've seen multiple horses come back out of there and have just underperformed. They've regressed from the speed figure standpoint. They really haven't run up to wagering expectations in their next races. So I just feel like Untreated beat a subpar group last time, and he would really need to step forward. It's possible. He's got a hot trainer in his barn, Todd Pletcher, and Louis Size being the rider. But I just feel like if he's going to be among the short prices or even anywhere close in price to Olympiad and Miles D, I much prefer those two. Craig, I'm going to throw one more horse at you that I want to get your take on, who I actually considered making my top pick. I put him second as my second pick behind Olympiad because I do believe Olympiad's going to be really tough in this race. But I mean, you mentioned Silver Prospector who's 15-1 in the morning line, and I agree with your thinking. Got a wide trip last time. He's certainly not impossible in this race. But there's another 15-1 shot that I think that's pretty interesting, and that's the number 11, Big Dreaming. This horse has been campaigned primarily on the turf during his career, but I'm going to say, just based on what we've seen from him on different surfaces, I would say he's more of a dirt synthetic horse. I mean, he's run 2 races on the dirt, and that's it in his 12-race career, but I think they've both been pretty good. I mean, his first start on the dirt, going all the way back to October of 2020, he earned a big 119 TimeformUS speed figure, beating a decent field that day, going the same mile in the 16th distance, and for whatever reason, they just haven't really focused on dirt ever since then. He got a wide trip in his only subsequent dirt race when he really didn't run that badly going the mile at Churchill Downs. He probably wants to go even longer than that. He's more of a 2-turn type, and he ran so well on the Synth 2 back at Turfway, a real upgrade from his turf races that surround it, that I wonder if getting on one of these, dirt/synthetic surfaces is really going to be to his benefit. And also, Big Dreaming is one of the few other horses in here that has shown some tactical speed in the past, and I would think that the connections are going to try to get somewhat forward, especially breaking from this outside post position. So he feels like one that's going to fly under the radar on this race, and I don't think he's impossible at all.
Yeah, he's one I just didn't know what to do with, to be honest. I was a little not happy with the post position. I probably would have liked him a little bit more, but I can see where you're coming from. He's in the 11 hole, but there's no reason he won't be able to get decent position before the turn because, as you said, he does have good tactical speed, and there's just not a ton of speed in this race. So I've got no problem. He's one. It will just kind of depend how my ticket breaks out and how much I want to spend if I use him, but no problem with him for me. He certainly has proven that he can run on all the surfaces, but I agree with you. He's been better on dirt and synthetic than he has on turf, so maybe this would be the spot for him. One other horse before we wrap this one up, I think we should at least mention. I'm not using him, but he's another one that's just a complete wild card for me, and that's multiple graded stakes winner Midcourt. I don't think he's ever left California before. It's the first time they're venturing out. I just don't know what to think of him. If that's a confident step or if it's grasping at straws, he seems to be working pretty well after his just disaster in the Awesome Again, where he didn't run whatsoever. I haven't read if maybe he bled that day. He certainly had that look. But what are you going to do with Midcourt?
Personally, I'm not really a fan of him in this race. I thought that he had a lot of things go his way when he got back into form for that allowance victory 2 back at Santa Anita, but that's going all the way back to last June. They've had a lot of trouble keeping him on the racetrack over the past year. He's also had a lot of issues coming out of the gate for a while now. That was an issue in the Awesome Again. He couldn't get close to the pace because he did break slowly, got sandwiched after that, and it just feels like he doesn't have that early speed that he once possessed. So I'm a little bit skeptical of him from that viewpoint. And also, John Sheriffs is just not a trainer that ever ships out of California. And I mean, I was looking at Formulator. If you could just filter by California starts over the past 5 years and do the subtraction, he's only had 5 starters in the past 5 years outside of the state of California, and he's 0 for 5. I wouldn't be surprised if the last horse he won with outside of California was maybe Zenyatta in the Apple Blossom. It's been a long time, so it's just not something that's really the forte for this barn, so I'm looking at others in this race.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if maybe it's a Lasix issue, because he can use it here at the fairgrounds in a graded stake. He wouldn't be able to in California. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm just speculating. We don't get that kind of. I haven't read. Maybe you could tag Brad Free and see if he would know. But yeah, it just seems like maybe that's what happened. But he would still be elite for me. I'm not using him.
Move on to another Grade 3 event, the Fairgrounds Stakes, going 1 1/8 on the turf course at Fairgrounds. Older horses once again in action here, and we have another field of 11 signed on. And Craig, I think that there's going to be a lot of focus trained towards the outside of the starting gate at the number 11 2 Emmys. This horse was the beaten favorite at 5-2 last time in the Colonel E.R. Bradley, when I actually thought he ran pretty well coming off the layoff despite just getting nailed at the wire. If you think the inside was not the best part of the turf course at Fairgrounds that day, well, then he probably didn't get an ideal trip setting the pace towards the inside the entire way. Again, I'm not sure that I'm totally on board with that, but it's something that's at least worth considering. And 2 Emmys has plenty of speed figures from earlier last year, especially going back to the second half of 2021, that would make him really tough in this race. I just feel like this race came up tougher than the Bradley did, so he might have to up his game.
Yeah, I remember talking about it. None of us particularly liked him. I think we had Marcus on that show, and he actually ran better than I thought he was going to. He ran just fine, but I'm not sure it's not going to be more of the same here. It seems like they're pretty intent on putting him on the lead, and I think there is some other speed to his inside here. He's going to have to deal with 40 under again, who tracked him all the way around the track and was able to get up. Halo again was right there on the lead, but I do wonder a little bit about that race because there just was nobody doing any real closing in there if it wasn't kind of a setup, even though the pace just looks pretty average when you look at the TimeformUS running line in there. And I just have my doubts about that race. So it's kind of like the race we talked about earlier for the fillies and mares, where I'm going to try to look outside of that for my main plays in this race. And I landed on a couple decent horses. And I know you'll remember the first one I'm going to talk about is the 3 Santine. He's a horse that I think we highlighted after his maiden win. I know we both loved him in that Keeneland race. And I just thought he ran an absolutely huge race from the 14 post in the Hollywood Derby. He jumped his speed figure all the way up to a 118 despite a tough trip while wide all the way around. And he's a horse I just think has a ton of ability. I'm under no illusion that we're going to get the 12-1 morning line, but I'd honestly be happy with half of that. I think he's that good, and he would be my top pick in here. Another horse I think you have to use if you're looking for outsiders is the Chad Brown horse, who's shipping in at Hamo, I guess is how you say it. Shipping in, he's been running in France. He moves to the Chad Brown barn, and don't really need to dwell on how well Chad Brown does with these kind. We all know. I'm not sure if you've seen any of his work, so I'll leave that to you to talk about. But those would be my 2 top picks in this race.
Yeah, we're on the same page with Santine. He makes a lot of sense in this race. I agree. You're not going to get anything close to that 12-1 morning line. This is a tough race to make a line for. I'll admit that, but I probably would have even considered switching his line with a horse like Largent, who I don't see why anybody would bet him at this race, even at 10-1, let alone 7-2. But I feel like Santine just he looks too appealing to not take a lot of money in this race. But then again, I thought he was going to be much shorter prices in each of his last two races, so maybe the public is just allergic to this horse for some reason. I thought he was going to be like 8-5 when he won that allowance race at Keeneland, and he went off at almost 9-2. He's run really well. I have really nothing to add to what you said about his last two performances. He was excellent in the Hollywood Derby, and I think if he continues to step forward, he's going to be pretty tough in here because he's one of the few horses in this race that does have like real palpable upside in just the fourth start of his career. I'm not against two Emmys who we started with. I just feel like there were other ways to go in this race. The slight stretch out to a mile and an eighth as opposed to a mile and a 16th last time. It's going to help two Emmys because I think any bit of extra ground that he can get is going to be in his favor. But we'll see how much pace develops because the same horses that he faced last time, like 40 Under and Halo again, will be pressing him towards the lead once again. As for that Chad Brown import at Homo, who's going out for, I guess what's going to be a private purchase by Michael Dubb and Manicat Stables. He seemed like a really precocious horse in France when he was a 2-year-old and even early in his 3-year-old season. He won a Group 3 event back in April, but his form kind of plateaued, even tailed off a little bit. He was not a factor in some races in the second half of 2021. He's kind of a one-paced horse. It doesn't seem like he's one of these European imports that has a big turn of foot. I don't know a whole lot about his pedigree. I've seen some progeny of Intello, and it seems like they don't always go on developing later in their careers. So keep that in mind. And also, I watched some of his recent workouts on XBTV from Palm Meadows, and the one note that I would make is, he seemed very washy in those workouts. I know that the weather can be hot in Florida sometimes, but he was extremely lathered up in the morning. So maybe that's something you want to pay attention to as he races at Fairgrounds on Saturday. If that's just him or if he is really washed out before the race, it's something that I would look for with this horse. But the workouts, it's hard to nitpick a Chad Brown workout. They're always very well orchestrated and choreographed. And he did what he was supposed to do. So I couldn't glean too much insight into him from that perspective. But I agree, he's definitely dangerous in this race. The one other horse, Craig, that I have to make a case for, I tried to make the case for him in the Bradley, but he was scratched out of that race, so I'm going to come back with the same opinion once again. The number 4, Major Fed, I feel like this is the kind of horse that I just have to take at least one shot with getting on the turf, because this horse, I can't believe he hasn't run on the turf yet. His pedigree is just screaming turf so loudly. Go Sapper on the top side, obviously he can get progeny that do anything, but if you look in DRF Formulator or even in TimeformUS through this dam's progeny, every single horse that she's produced has been better on the turf, and not just a little better, like significantly better. He's a full brother to Zapparini, a multiple turf winner who was actually pretty good. I think placed in some stakes races, and for whatever reason, his connections have never tried it. And they were on the Derby trail. They had plenty of dirt opportunities to take advantage of, and this horse has run well in the dirt, but it just feels like there's so much pedigree evidence pointing to him handling this surface, and there's so much going on in this race. It feels like Major Fed has to be a price. He'll be every bit of that 10 or 12-1, if not more than that. So he's definitely a horse that I'm going to be using prominently in this race.
Yeah, I saved him for you. I knew you were going to use him. I'm getting old, but my memory can remember a few weeks back still. So I definitely have him on my tickets because you convinced me back, I guess it was 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was now. So I would use him. The other horse I did want to talk about, and you touched on him briefly, is Largent, because he's actually the second choice on the morning line, but I would just tell people, go watch that return race where he was 3-5, and I'm totally with you. He was coming off a year-long layoff, and I don't see how anyone could be optimistic off of that race. He's in the red-hot Todd Pletcher barn. He was winning everything at that time. He kind of still is winning a lot, but back then he was literally winning with every horse he sent out at Gulfstream, and Largent just had nothing. So he's a horse that, like you, I assume, I want no parts of in here.
Yeah, I've got the same take there. And Craig, neither of us mentioned our old friend Captivating Moon, who's just entered in one of the races this time. He's only targeting the turf, and he's actually the defending champion in this Fairgrounds Stakes. He won it last year at 43-1, but feel like he'd be a similar kind of upset if he pulled off that feat once again.
Yeah, it would. Coming off the layoff, that was a bit weaker field, I would say, last year. Didn't draw some of the talent that we see in the race this year.
Okay, moving on to the penultimate leg of the sequence as we get into the 3-year-old action. The Grade 2 Rachel Alexandra offering Kentucky Oaks qualifying points to this field of 11 runners. That's the theme so far, 11 horse fields. We've got another pretty competitive one here, Craig. I'll be interested to see how the board shakes out. Feels like we're gonna get some support for La Crete from the inside. I know she's 8-1 in the morning line, but feels like one that has to take some money in this race off her local victory last time, with Joao Rosario staying aboard her. Hidden Connection, who's coming out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies from last year. She's one that I know garnered support last year, and some people could have some high hopes for her in her 3-year-old debut. And we've got some California shippers, particularly Awake at Midnight, who's coming off a big speed figure performance when she was second in the Santa Ynez. So I don't know where you want to start, Craig, but there's a lot going on in this race.
Well, I'll start by saying apparently, and it's something I kind of went race by race and didn't look at it all that much. Apparently, I really hated the Lecomte card because in basically every single race, I'm looking to beat the horses that are coming back from that day. And Lacrete's no different in here. Granted, she's 8-1 on the morning line. It's not like she's one of the favorites. But for me, anybody coming out of that race is just a total line out. I don't think there was much in there. There are a couple others. The 6 Candy Raid, who's a long price. But yeah, I'm going to look in different directions. And I do think you have to respect both of those California horses, Awake at Midnight and Miss Maddie B. They both come out with pretty big speed figures. It's one of those races where I wish we had some run backs to report, but it was a small field. Nobody's really run back yet. Under the Stars won the race, hasn't come back. Neither of these two, obviously, but none of the three also ran either. So it's one, there were some big jumps in there, and I'd like to see some confirmation. Not that it was an easy speed figure to make, so I'm not too doubtful, but the thing to keep in mind is it was a 7-furlong race. Well, this is a 1.16 miles, but that said, I don't really see much reason Awake at Midnight couldn't handle the distance, being by Nyquist out of a Union Rags mare. And personally, I think she is definitely the horse to beat in here. But she'll be on my tickets, but for my top pick, I'm going to go in a little bit different direction. And that's with the 5-horse Divine Huntress for Graham Motion. She's a horse who's actually shipping in from Parks, won an allowance race last time with just ridiculous ease, I think, as Tom Durkin was known to say now and then, and won by over a dozen lengths that day with a 101 speed figure. And that was her first race after what I guess was a private purchase. And it seems like the Connections knew what they were doing, because I think they got a really good one in here. I do think there's going to be some pace, which would set up her late run. And she's a horse I'm going to lean on pretty heavy in verticals in this race because I like her quite a bit.
Yeah, she's definitely an interesting player in this race. You might recall we talked about her last race on the Pacecast. I was kind of scouring the charts that week. It was a slow week, and I found that race at Parks. And kind of, we had both mentioned that we'd look forward to seeing her in a Kentucky Oaks prep eventually, and that's happening in her very next start. And I agree. I think she fits pretty well in this race, and she's kind of a wild card. You don't know what you're going to get from her because she's never faced competition at this level, but she certainly looked good stretching out for the first time in that last race. And Graham Motion certainly knows what to do with a good horse. Jose Ortiz taking the mount. There are some good signs here. And like you said, she's supposed to get some pace to close into. I want to get your take on Hidden Connection because she's a difficult call for me. I'll just say I ultimately decided to go against her in this race because as impressive as she was in those first two races, as I go back and re-examine, seems like that Pocahontas field has come back pretty weak over time, and I know she won it by nearly 10 lengths, and she came into that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies as one of the favorites, but she stumbled at the start, but she was pretty disappointing nevertheless in the Breeders' Cup, and coming into her 3-year-old season, just looking through this field, she's got to get faster, and I wonder if she really still has that edge that it seemed like she had last year.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, I did not like her at all in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. One of the things I like to see when a horse wins as easily as she was winning those first two races, I want to see him run a decent speed figure. And really, the ones were running were not competitive with horses like Echo Zulu and Juju's Map. And she did have a bit of an excuse, as you said, but basically she just ran to her speed figure. So she's going to have to take a big jump up in here to compete with the California shippers, even a horse like Divine Huntress, who I think is better than what her speed figure was. So drawing that far outside pace, post position in a race where there is some other speed in here, and she's never really been in a race with a fast pace. If you look at her pace figure lines, there's a lot of blue in there. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile was moderate at best. It has a ascending line where the pace figures are slower and it gets faster towards the end. So at a short price, she's a horse that if she beats me, so be it. I don't want her on my tickets.
Yeah, another horse that I would consider a top contender in this race is the number 4 Dreamlith. I don't really have many knocks against her, Craig. It just feels like she's taken a big step forward since they stretched her out in distance, which probably shouldn't be a big surprise. She's by Medaglia d'Oro. She's got a nice stamina pedigree on the bottom side. And I mean, she wasn't quite up to the challenge in the Alcibiades 2 back, but I liked her effort last time in the Goldenrod when they put the blinkers on for the first time. We haven't seen too many of the horses run back out of that race, so the jury's still out on how strong it was, but we have seen Secret Oath come out of that race to do some really nice things at Oaklawn recently, so Dreamlith did get that vote of confidence in her performance, and I just think that she makes a ton of sense based on her speed figures to close out her 2-year-old season, and she's going to get some pace to close into, so she's one of the ones that I would consider a top contender in this race, and I do prefer her to horses like Hidden Connection and La Crete, even North County, who did not run in the Silver Bullet Day, but comes out of the Untappable, which was run back at the end of December. I just feel like, as you said, those local fairgrounds horses, they're maybe not of the same quality as some of the shippers in this race. So I do like, and I probably shouldn't call Dreamlith a shipper because she's been training at fairgrounds, but this will be her first start at the fairgrounds. So I think that Dreamlith and Divine Huntress both make a lot of sense. But just kind of circling back to those California fillies that you were mentioning at the start, Craig, Awake at Midnight, I think that she definitely has the speed figure credentials based on that last race. I'm not quite as convinced as you that she wants to go this far. The Nyquist, we've seen them go either way. Some want to go long, some don't. On the dam side, it really is more sprint pedigree. A lot of the female side runners have been more sprinters. And just watching her physically, she strikes me as more of a sprinting type. She did run very well in the Santa Ynez last time, and in her debut against some good horses, like she beat Under the Stars in her career debut, as well as Adair Manor, who ran that gigantic speed figure in Lost Virginus for Bob Baffert recently. But I'm not totally sold on Awake at Midnight stretching out, and for what it's worth, you can look up some different kinds of stretch out stats for Doug O'Neill, but they're generally not good. So I just have a little bit of concern about Awake at Midnight at a short price. And of the California shippers, I actually am very intrigued by Miss Maddie B. Just an interesting trajectory for this horse's career so far, because she just has that 1-2 turn race, and it came on the turf too back in November, but that was really impressive. I went back and watched that race at Del Mar. She made this big looping move coming to the quarter pole and won off so impressively, like she was relishing the added ground, and she was a big surprise that day, winning at 29-1, but they took the blinkers off for the first time, and it seems like since they removed those blinkers, she's just kind of elevated her game to a new level, and she showed this uncharacteristic speed in the Santa Ynez last time, and she faded late, but I think that she had a right to after getting involved in that pace, and just kind of looking at the way she ran going long on the turf and examining her pedigree, being bitonalist. She's a full sister to a horse named Allworthy, who's pretty good, runs in Florida, is a dirt router. I feel like dirt routing might ultimately be what Miss Maddie B is best at, and this is the first time that she's getting to do it. So I'm pretty interested in her, and I feel like she's going to be a nice price in this race.
Yeah, she is, and she's going to be on my tickets. I was a little puzzled by the ride last time. I have no idea what Mike Smith had her battling for the lead in a dirt sprint when she came from near the back of the pack in a turf route. But sometimes that's Mike Smith for you. It worries me a little bit that he's actually still on the horse, but I think we'll get a little bit different ride. I don't think he's going to be gunning out for the front, or I would hope not. As for Dreamlith, she's the other one I would definitely use in here. I've got no knocks on her. The speed figure's solid. It was run a race before that Kentucky Jockey Club, which has come back very strong. The speed figures were easy to do. So, yeah, I've got no real knocks on her. I definitely think she's a contender as well. I'm using just 4 horses in here. Her, Divine Huntress, and the 2 California horses.
Well, speaking of that Kentucky Jockey Club, let's move right into a discussion of the winner of that race, Smile Happy, who figures to go favored in the final leg of this Pick 5 sequence, the Grade 2 Risen Star. And Craig, I think there's a lot of anticipation for this horse's 3-year-old debut because this Kentucky Derby picture right now is very muddled, complicated by the fact that many horses from the Bob Baffert stable who seem like they would otherwise be strong contenders haven't earned points yet. And I feel like there's been a lot of hope placed on Smile Happy going out for the Ken McPeek barn to maybe be that shining light to kind of take control of this Kentucky Derby picture right now. And he certainly showed a lot of promise last year in both that debut victory and the Kentucky Jockey Club. And I'll let you talk a little bit more about how that race has come back and what you think we can expect from him in his 3-year-old debut.
Yeah, he's a horse. He's usually the kind of horse I want to bet against because he's a guy. He's going to have a following being by Run Happy. He's been... he's run fast, but not so fast. There's been faster horses in him, but it's hard to really have any knocks. He had a brief layoff after his win in that Kentucky Jockey Club, but he was back on the work tab pretty quick. He's been working well, and as you said, that race has been really strong. Classic Causeway came back to win the Sam Davis last weekend. White Abarrio won the Holy Bull, I think it was. I know we both were big fans of Call Me Midnight, who came back to win the Lecomte and is skipping this race to come back, I think, in the Louisiana Derby. And it's not just that they all won. They all won while increasing their speed figure, which is something Smile Happy will probably have to do as well. But I don't really have any knocks on him. I have to use him as an A horse in here. The other horse I'm going to use, because I just think he ran really well last time, almost too good to lose, though I'm glad he did lose, and that was Epicenter. He got a nice 112. He set a fast pace and just didn't quite have enough to hold off Call Me Midnight. But he was able to beat everybody else, and I think he's the real deal. I don't think the extra 16th of a mile, it might even help him a little bit, as maybe the others won't be so anxious to go fast early. So I think he's the real deal as well. And the other horses who are going to take money in here, I'm not so excited about. Papa Cap, I mean, he ran fine in the Lecomte, but if he didn't beat Epicenter that day, I'm not sure where he's going to find the talent to beat him going forward. These are 3-year-olds, so it could change, but it just seems like he's kind of reached his peak. Didn't really show any improvement last out, so I'm always skeptical of those kind. And then we have Zandon, who's shipping in for Chad Brown, and I was really kind of impressed with his Remsen when it happened, and he obviously had some trouble with Mo Donegal and Irad Ortiz. But the more I looked back at that Remsen, it just wasn't all that strong of a race. Mo Donegal he didn't come back and run very well in Florida. A couple other horses have run back from there and really haven't done much running. And I wonder, maybe I'm overthinking it, but if Zandon was really the goods, Chad Brown, I don't know that he's going to ship him to the Fairgrounds. So I just have a feeling Zandon's going to be overbet, and I'm just not the fan I was of him back in December when we saw him last time. So for me, I'm just going too deep in here.
I'm glad we have a slightly different take on this one, though we don't really disagree about the favorite, Smile Happy. I don't have a whole lot to add. I feel like we just laid out the case for this horse. There's so much to like about him. The only thing not to like is the expected price in this race, because I do think he's going to go down from that 7-2 morning line, but he probably should. The one knock that I found against Smile Happy that you might just want to take with a grain of salt, some people care about this stuff, some don't, but Ken McPeek, he can be the kind of trainer that's a little streaky. He does well under certain situations, others not so much, and Ken McPeek has just not had any success at the Fairgrounds, and he started a lot of horses here. Over the past 5 years, he is just 3 for 61, 5% 8% win rate with a $1.32 ROI at the Fairgrounds. Just something that's worth bearing in mind. He does ship a lot of horses for stakes at this track and doesn't always do well. So just a little knock that you might want to be aware of with a horse that's going to be a short price, because you never need that many reasons to take a shot against a horse that a lot of people are going to be singling and leaning heavily on, especially in the last leg of a pick 5 sequence. So I do like Smile Happy, but there are some other horses that I do want to give consideration to. And Craig, I have not a whole lot to add about your assessment of the Lecomte. I feel like Epicenter is the horse you want out of that race. He would be the horse you want out of that race, even if Call Me Midnight was in here, because he ran so well last time, and he's going to get a very similar trip, probably on the front end by himself. I don't think he's going to be walking. They might push him a little bit, but he's going to get the kind of trip that he really does prefer, and I'm not convinced that he can't get the mile and an eighth, though, so I do view Epicenter as a real threat. But Craig, you probably are aware of this since we've talked about him a lot. I like Zandon. I'm a real fan of this horse, and I'm going to quibble with one point that you made and actually say that the opposite is true, that if Chad Brown really likes a dirt horse, he's not going to run them at Gulfstream. I think I even heard Chad, or perhaps I've heard it through our friend Andy Serling, who does talk to Chad a lot, but I've heard him say this in the past, that he really has a distaste for running his good dirt horses at Gulfstream. He does not like that main track. He'll run some young horses there, but not his preference for the older ones. So I think that's an interesting point to make with Zandon. And he also mentioned that, and I think in some public quotes, that he likes the mile and an eighth distance for this race, and he doesn't want to turn this horse back because he ran the mile and an eighth in the Remsen last time. And like you, I was impressed at the time, and I'm still impressed, unlike you. I thought that the Remsen was a strong race. It was not the kind of race that's ever going to look great from a TimeformUS standpoint, because the early pace was so slow and they came home fast, and we don't really reward horses for doing that on the dirt. But it was a race where there were just two main protagonists going in. It shouldn't be a big surprise that only two horses ran well coming out of it. And I thought Mo Donegal and Zandon put on a nice show that day. They drew, what was it, like almost 10 lengths clear of the rest of the field. So it doesn't so much matter to me who else was in that race. And I would say that Mo Donegal came back in the Holy Bull and ran about as well as I would have expected. I didn't think he was some cinch in that race, because the mile and a 16th of the short stretch at Gulfstream is just totally the wrong spot for him. I know Todd Pletcher likes to run his good 3-year-olds at Gulfstream, but I think Mo Donegal will fare better when he gets away from that configuration. And Zandon, I thought actually might have run the better race in the Remsen, because he was outside early. He was sitting on top of that pace, but Mo Donegal got the jump on him, and Zandon had to really battle back towards the inside. As it's been talked about so much, things got really tight in the final 16th of the mile of that race, and Zandon never gave up. And one more thing is, I found an interesting stat when I was kind of just playing around with the DRF formulator for Chad Brown. On dirt over the past 5 years, with third-time starters, if their second start in a route, Chad Brown is 23 for 63. That's a 35% win rate with a $2.29 ROI. And notably, that's a much better stat than he has with second-time starters, first-time route. So that says to me that these horses that he wants to stretch out, he's not always right the first time. They don't always give their best effort the first time, but in the long run, probably the next time that they try a route, they generally improve and perform. So I think that's an interesting pattern that's developed that's relevant to Zandon. And I just love both of these horses' races, and I think that he's going to be pretty tough and a real rival for Smile Happy in this race.
I do think we need to talk a little bit about Slow Down Andy. If for no other reason, he's the horse that finished ahead of Messier last time. Me personally, I think that race is a bit phony. Not so much that Messier did. I just don't think Messier ran his race that day. He doesn't seem to run as well at Los Al, so I don't know if beating him there was the feather in its cap that a lot of people are going to make it out to be. I mean, his speed figure was okay. It was a 109, but I do worry because it was a big jump from his previous figures. Even though it was his first time going long, you know, I brought it up on this show many times. Los Al is just such a different track. I tend to ignore races there, whether they're good or bad. So if I look back at his prior form, I'm just not as impressed. So he's one I'm not going to use. I'm not sure how much money he's going to take in here. I don't know if he'll really be 9-2. Again, I'm not trying to pick on the morning line maker. These are really tough races to do. But personally, I suspect that Zandon will be the second choice. I don't see Papa Cap being lower than him. And I guess there's 2 4-1s in here. I would say Epicenter, then Zandon will probably be the 1-2 choices, followed by Papa Cap and Slow Down Andy. But of those, the one I definitely don't want to use at all would be Slow Down Andy.
Yeah, we agree about the morning line conversation. I think we would have it pretty similar. As for the Los Al Futurity, I don't know. I agree with you in principle about Los Al and some horses not handling it. I don't totally buy the trainer speak for Messier about him not liking Los Al because, frankly, Messier was just pretty ordinary for 4 starts and actually ran his highest speed figure ever at Los Al and then suddenly turned into a super horse last time. So I don't necessarily buy that he was great in 3 races and ran poorly at Los Al. That doesn't really hold any water to me. I thought he ran fine with the Los Alamitos Futurity, and Slowdown Andy was just better than him that day. The interesting thing for me about the Los Alamitos Futurity was that Slowdown Andy, even though it was his 3rd career start, looked so green. I mean, he was like running sideways in the stretch. It looked like he reacted badly to the whip. It seemed like he was going to pull himself up with an eighth of a mile to go, and somehow he still got by Messier. I guess he was running onto the wire, even though it looked like he was just going up and down. So I don't know really what to make of that. I wouldn't say that I loved either of Slowdown Andy's first 2 races. I suppose it's possible he just improved with the added ground. But like you, I feel like this is a much tougher race. Messier notwithstanding, there wasn't a whole lot else going on in Los Alamitos Futurity. And I feel like Slowdown Andy is going to have to work out a trip from the outside post and step up to beat a better field here. But I don't think he's totally impossible. I would just say I would be much more inclined to look at Epicenter, Smile Happy, and Zandon as the horses I'm most interested in, and likely in reverse order than that.
Yeah, and what did you think about Papa Cap? I assume you don't like him because you didn't mention him, but he's going to take some money and draws the inside post. As I said, I don't really care for him. I think maybe he's peaked, but I'm just curious. I haven't watched your preview yet. I try not to do that when we're going to talk about the races, but I will after the show.
Yeah, I guess he's not impossible. I just thought he got a pretty good trip last time to Lecomte. I mean, he sat off the pace. He got into the race at the right time, had a clear rail run, and just couldn't quite make up the ground. And similar thing in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, got a fantastic trip and was second best to Corniche. And I'm not sure that the Breeders' Cup Juvenile is necessarily the strongest race. So I thought that there were others who A, had more upside, and B, had shown a little bit more up until this point. Well, Craig, that is a look at all of the races in the sequence. We gave out a lot of ideas, I think. Let's just do a brief recap from a ticket construction standpoint. I did not craft an ABC kind of wager in Ticketmaker before doing the show, so I'm going to kind of go on the fly, but just talk about like summing up some of your opinions that we mentioned and how you'd emphasize them or de-emphasize them in a pick 5 sort of wager.
Yeah, so in the first race, the Albert Stahl Memorial, I want to go away from the horses that are coming out of that Krantz, although I will use Past the Plate. I thought she was the best, but I was looking for horses coming out of there, and I'm going to lean on Amiche and then kind of spread with some others in there. You talked about a couple of them. She Can't Sing. I'm not using Abscond. I didn't like her at all, and Drapes Outside I would use a bit. In the next race, the Mine Shaft, I'm going to lean pretty heavily on Olympiad and Silver Prospector, and then use kind of Miles D as a backup. I just think the others have a more of a tactical advantage with a more early speed, more inside post. So that's the way I'd lean there. In the Fairgrounds, once again, I'm going to go away from the horses coming out of the race from Lecomte Day and going to go with Santine, who I think is a really talented, newly turned 4-year-old, and the Chad Brown shipper coming over for the first time. And then I'll use Major Fed as well underneath. The Rachel Alexandra, going to go with Divine Huntress, the one who's only been in Graham Motion's barn. And then use a couple of the California horses, Awake at Midnight, Miss Maddie B, and also Dream Lith. And then the Risen Star, I'm just going to go with 2, Epicenter and Smile Happy.
Yeah, we just have a few slight differences along the way. We're both going to spread in the Al Stahl Memorial, the first leg of the sequence, in kind of similar fashions. I do want to use horses prominently, like Out of Sorts, She Can't Sing, and Drapes, and I would use Craig's pick of Amiche on the same tier. Might leave out Abscond totally. I haven't quite decided yet. I have to see how expensive it gets, but I am somewhat against her. I'm not so much against Past the Plate from a handicapping standpoint. I just feel like she's not the kind of horse that I want to take a short price on. I would lean most heavily of any place in the sequence on Olympiad in the mine shaft. I really like him in this race. And my main backup would be the number 11 Big Dreaming. I'm not against Craig's interesting pick of Silver Prospector, just not quite as bullish on his chances, so I'd use him as like more of a C type for me, and maybe the same for Miles D. In the Fairgrounds, I would lean most heavily on Santine and Major Fed. Those are the two interesting horses for me, and runners like Ed Hamo, the Chad Brown shipper, and two Emmys would be more backups for me. In the Rachel Alexandra, I think the logical player is Dream Lith, along with, just to a lesser extent, Divine Huntress, and my interesting horse is Miss Maddie B, so I would use probably her and Dream Lith most heavily with Divine Huntress, and the others maybe on a much lower tier, and then I'd close things out by leaning mostly on Smile Happy and Zandon, maybe giving slight preference to Zandon, and the only backup I would need in that race is Epicenter. So, Craig, hopefully we gave out some good ideas on this one. We are kind of deep in some races, not so in others, but it feels like a sequence that, at least for me, it was pretty fun to handicap, and hopefully we gave out some good insights that people can use.
Yeah, this is one I wish New Orleans was a little closer for me, because this is the kind of card I would love to go to. Just a lot of great races. Even early on the card, there's a bunch of maiden special weights with some promising horses. There's a turf sprint that we didn't get to talk about. So just a great card. I'm sure I'll be watching all of it for sure.
Well, everybody, thanks for listening to our thoughts. Good luck if you're playing that Fairgrounds card this weekend. Remember that you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch the TimeformUS Pacecast when we recap all of these races next Tuesday.